Before the gate is fully seen, the road has already gone quiet. Dust has settled into the shallow ruts, and the last warmth of the day has thinned from the stones until only a little coolness remains near the wall. The dark gathers low first, then seems to rise more slowly into the brick. A little wind moves across the packed earth. A little lamp glow touches one section of the wall, then appears to rest there rather than spread. The night does not invite the listener so much as receive the listener gently, as though it had already been waiting in this shape for some time. Nothing here asks to be entered quickly. The road does not look empty in a lonely way. It looks complete in the way a place can feel complete once the last practical movement has passed out of it and only the softer forms remain. Under the arch, the timber doors remain open just enough for the courtyard beyond to stay dimly readable. Iron fittings, brick edges, and the shadow above the lintel hold together without needing to be pressed into importance. The threshold is present, but it does not declare itself. What matters here is not that a gate appears, only that the same quiet continues through it. The passage inward feels patient, and the air on either side of the doorway seems to belong to one unbroken hour rather than to two separate spaces. If the listener crosses this threshold at all, the crossing should feel almost unnoticed. The night simply narrows for a moment, then opens again without changing its tone. Inside, the courtyard keeps its open center mostly dark, while the edge rooms and shallow arcades gather the warmer light. The eye does not need the whole space. A wall recess, a bench, and the line of the paving are enough to let the place settle around the listener with no need for overview. The calm deepens by broadening rather than by changing. The courtyard does not feel newly entered now. It feels as though the road has simply loosened into a larger quiet, one where the sky above the walls remains present but never dramatic. Somewhere beyond the first glance, cloth might hang in a darker opening, or a low shadow might stretch farther along the paving than expected. None of it needs emphasis. It is enough that the courtyard holds more room for the same silence. Near one wall, a long trough holds a narrow plane of dark water that answers the lamp with only a weak reflection. A bucket rope, a damp stone edge, and the quiet surface keep the scene together with almost no effort. The water remains darker than the light that touches it. Water slows the imagination naturally. It lets the courtyard breathe more softly, and it gives the night another surface on which to rest without becoming brighter or more active. The listener should feel a small cooling here, not a change of subject. Nothing in the trough moves enough to become an event. The reflection arrives, weakens, and remains. In that slight repeating of light and dark, the episode can lower itself another step. Beyond a side opening, saddles, folded blankets, and travel straps have been hung or laid down in practical order. Leather, wool, and wood absorb the light rather than returning it, and the room feels quieter for that. Even the shapes of the objects seem to rest more than they display. Nothing here points toward departure. The gear has already passed out of use for the night, and the listener should feel that completed stillness before noticing any particular buckle or strap or rolled, felt edge. The room keeps distance without reminding anyone of movement. This is where the caravanserai begins to feel like shelter more than passage. The road is still near enough to be remembered, but the memory of it has already softened into stored weight and folded material. In the main hall, rugs and low bedding places remain in a loose order left by the evening. Nothing feels staged. The floor keeps its lived-in stillness, and the lamps remain far enough apart to let shadow do quiet work between them. The room is broader, though it is not more awake for being broad. The voice should stay close here, but never perform intimacy. The hall is calm because it has already finished being used, and because it no longer asks to be interpreted while it rests. Cloth, floor, and dim timber supports carry the listener without asking for attention. Now and then the darkness between the lamps should matter as much as the lamps themselves. The pause between one pool of warmth and the next is part of the room. It lets the night continue through the architecture rather than stop at each visible object. A smaller niche near the entrance holds a writing board, a reed pen, a waxed lamp bowl, and a few folded records tied with cord. The details are modest enough that they almost disappear into usefulness. They remain where they were left, but not in a way that calls for inventory. History could become too eager in a place like this. It should not. The night leaves behind only a trace of order, and then it resumes its slower shape without pause or explanation. A record exists, but the voice does not have to turn it into information pressure. The niche matters because it confirms that careful hands were here before the hour softened, not because it introduces a new line of thought. The room can hold that trace and then let it recede again. Farther in, a brazier has gone from heat to memory. Only a small, dull glow remains among the coals, and the metal edge of the basin catches a little light before giving it back to the dark. Nothing still burning asks to be watched. Warmth is still present, but it no longer asks anything of the room. It simply lingers, and because it lingers rather than shines, the listener can rest inside that after state without being drawn forward. This is warmth that has become part of the background. The air near the brazier may feel slightly fuller, though even that impression should remain quiet. It is enough that the room has not lost the evening all at once. It has only let it settle lower. A narrow stair climbs toward upper cells and storage ledges, though even the ascent feels inward rather than upward. One lamp below leaves the higher stone in softer darkness, and the railing disappears a little at a time. Each step seems to enter more quiet rather than more height. This is not the kind of stair that changes the episode. It only thins the world slightly, removing a little noise and a little density until the same night feels quieter in another register. The listener should not feel pulled, only carried. By the time the stair is left behind, the mind should already be moving more slowly than the image itself. That is the useful work of the scene, not transition, but gradual reduction. Above the courtyard, the gallery keeps a longer view of the inner square, the lamps below, and the dark sky beyond the roof line. More air passes here, though the atmosphere remains sheltered and low. The wider view should not become brighter in feeling. The gallery should feel like a widening of the same thought, not a new thought. Timber posts, brick shadow, and the slower geometry of the court below are enough to carry the listener farther without any rise in pressure. The distance itself should feel padded. From here, the caravanserai is easier to read and less necessary to read. The shapes below can remain partly unresolved. That unresolved quality is part of the sleep drift, because it lets the room stay known without being fully named again. One small guest cell sits partly open, with a folded blanket, a clay cup, and a wall niche that holds the least possible light. The room offers almost nothing, and because of that it feels complete. There is very little here to disturb the shape of rest. Stillness grows stronger here by becoming personal without becoming dramatic. The space is human in scale, but the narration should remain even and uninsistent, letting the room stay plain and restful for a little longer than seems necessary. The spareness is the atmosphere. The bedroll, the cup, the wall, and the small recess of light do not suggest absence in a lonely way. They suggest enough shelter, enough pause, enough of the night left untouched. In the kitchen, work has already ended. A pot remains near the edge of warmth. A board has been left clean enough for the night, and the room rests in the softer disorder that follows use. It is a room that has finished its useful movement and allowed quiet to return. Only a few anchors belong here: pot, board, Ember glow. That is enough. The room should feel as though it is releasing its last wakefulness and settling into the same courtyard hush that has been present all along. Nothing needs to be added beyond that release. Even the traces of use should seem muted now, as if they have been thinned by the hour. The kitchen does not preserve action. It preserves the place left behind by action, once the place has cooled. The storeroom holds sacks, jars, and folded coverings in a denser arrangement, but the density should feel padded rather than busy. Grain, cloth, and clay settle the frame with a heavier calm. The room deepens the episode without tightening it. Nothing here wants to be counted. The room is better felt as weight, temperature, and hush, and that weight should drift into the next scene without feeling cut apart by the move. The darkness between the stored things helps more than their number does. This is a good place for the voice to slow inside its own line endings. Matter has gathered here. The listener should feel that gathering as support, not as accumulation. At the roofline, the dark opens wider, but the episode should not become grander. A low parapet, a distant horizon, and a modest movement of air are enough to let the scale increase without waking the listener. Space widens, pressure does not. The wind belongs here as continuity, not effect. It carries the same night through a wider opening, then lowers again without ever sounding like a cue. The listener should feel the outside without leaving the shelter of the whole. What changes here is not intensity but breadth. The room of the episode becomes larger for a moment, then remains just as soft inside that larger reach. Looking down again, one lamp is burned lower than the others. The courtyard paving holds its faint shape, and the shadow around the remaining light becomes more generous than the light itself. Darkness now feels more hospitable than empty. This scene should feel like a soft gathering in. Not a conclusion announced, only a narrowing of what remains visible, with the voice landing more softly at the ends of lines than at their beginnings. The last lamp is not an emblem. It is only what still remains. By now, the listener should not feel scene entry at all, only the continued lowering of attention, as if the whole caravanserai were gradually deciding to keep the night without further help from language. At the close, the court does not empty. It simply quiets beyond language. The paving, the dark archways, and the last trace of light remain in relation for a little while longer, as if the place will keep holding the night after the voice is gone. The scene is still present even before the episode stops speaking. Nothing needs to be summarized. Nothing needs to return. The final lines should feel as though they are setting the voice down gently inside the room, not closing the room around it. The last spoken words should leave a little air behind them. After that, the court should continue by itself. The light remains. The dark remains. The air remains. The episode ends only after all three have been given a little more time together, and after the listener has been allowed to stay inside that still relation without any new instruction.